Hey guys. He's back. Who was that? What horror movie was that where he emerges from the pond? Anyway, you guys watch better movies than that. Hey guys, it's week 2. I had an interesting week because I got some emails from some of you, and you said you taught out of the Bible last week, like verse for verse out of the Bible. Thought you were a psychologist. I go, yeah, but I'm a psychologist that studies the Bible. You know, the Bible and good science are always going to say the same thing. And it's so interesting to me how many people are unaware of the incredible wisdom that God gave us in His Word. We're going to hop into that, but it's so amazing to me when people they just don't know what's there. I was sitting on an airplane, and the worst thing you can do on an airplane when you get the question, so what do you do? You know, in the seat next to you. So what do you do? The worst thing you ever do is say, I'm a psychologist. Because instantly, I got to tell you about and I'm saying I love my silence on airplanes. And so I try to never say that. You know, if somebody asks me, what do you do? I say, I write books about Jesus, and then their newspaper goes up, like this. So one day I'm off my game, and this lady says, so what do you do? I said, I'm a psychologist. She goes, I got to tell you about my boyfriend. I go, here we go. So she says, well, we broke up again, but I miss him, and I'm afraid I'm going to go back. But we, every time I go back, it's bad. I said, why is it bad? She goes, well, if I don't do what he wants, he just gets angry at me, and then I have to, kind of pacify him and do whatever he wants, and then I get sick of that, but I miss him, and back and forth like a tennis match. And I said, well, there's an old saying, and it says, if you rescue an angry man, you're only going to have to do it again tomorrow. She goes, whoa, that's amazing. Because that's my life. She says, where did you learn that? I said, it's in the Bible, Proverbs 19:19. She goes, that's in the Bible? I said, yeah, check it out sometime. So we're gonna check out some stuff today. We're talking about God's will, what Bill calls finding your why, and finding God's purpose for you. And I think it's one of the coolest topics because, God made each of you, He calls you His workmanship, that He's made you with certain gifts and certain, abilities and things that light up your heart, as we're going to see. And you find your purpose that way, and He made you for this. My one question this past week is, so Donald Trump's hairdresser, who told her or him that was God's will for their life to go into? Anyway, all right, I hope you find yours a little better than that. So let's hop into this. What is this path we're talking about, finding our purpose? Now, I'm not just talking about your hairdresser career, or your career in business, or your life's calling, or something like that. I'm talking about finding God's will, something we do every day. Sometimes it's in your marriage for the next step, right? What's God's will to get through this dilemma, or the next step that we take? Sometimes if you're single, how many of you are single? Come on, guys. You didn't learn last week. You're supposed to raise your hand higher so you can be seen. Stand up if you want to. All right. Or it could be in your business with your team. What's next? What's God calling us to do? What's God calling me to do? Or what's the purpose in our next season? And there's a path to that. And so what we're going to look at is we're going to look at that path. And I'm going to start with one of my favorite verses about that. And it is where in Proverbs 16, verse 9, it says this, that your path comes from your heart. Your path comes from your heart. It says a person's path comes from their heart, and then God directs your steps. Steps means you're actually moving. Heart means something happens. Something happens inside of you that touches you, for your next season or the next thing you want to do, and you come alive in some way, and God begins to speak to your heart. And the way you know he speaks in your heart, one of the ways the Bible tells us, is we start to have these rumblings. Something comes alive. It's what you want. It's what you start to desire. Now, there's some issues involved in this, okay? But I want to start with that this is where it starts. It starts in your heart. Let me ask you a question. Where did this incredible building come from? You know, we say like, okay, so a construction company built it, or, you know, all this stuff. Let me tell you the real truth about where this building came from. Look, everybody just look up at how incredible this thing is. This building came from the heart of probably about a 2-year-old little toddler. That's where it truly, literally came from. Let's say it's a little girl. Many years ago, she's playing on the floor in the den, and Aunt Sally had sent her this present. It was a bunch of little blocks. She never had played with them before. She's crawling around. She discovers them, and she picks one up and stacks it on another, and then picks another and stacks it up. And when they stacked up like that and they stayed, and she had built something for the first time, something leapt inside of her. Something came alive inside of her, this desire for, she didn't know what it was, but her body was all of a sudden turning electric, like the scooter didn't do, or like the, you know, for some reason the golf club didn't do, or some other toy. This was something about her. And then from there, she got excited and she knocked them over, and then parents clapped, and then she built them again. And she was on this path that there's something about building things, and she got an art board, and she learned to draw, and then she took art, and then she took math, and then this desire was being followed, this path, and then God was leading her down different steps. And it came from her heart. That's where it always comes from. I want you to find your heart. God is a father. I'm a father. I've got 2 girls, Olivia and Lucy. They're 13 and 14. Some of you are going, 13 and 14? How old are you? Right? I put off adulthood as long as possible. It's a good plan, actually. And sort of like my dad, my dad had me like way old. And when I figured out the math on that one day, he had they had one before World War II, and then he came back from the war. He had another one, thought he was done. Years later, they had me, and I did the math on this. I said, Dad, I wasn't planned, was I? He looks at me, he goes, no, but we've always tried to make the most of our mistakes. We do this. So I have 2 girls, and the older one, Olivia, she is into soccer in school, academics and soccer. I mean, she's just in some other stuff, but I mean, she's just on this race, right? The little one, Lucy, is not that into academics, likes soccer, but when it comes to anything creative, and especially music and creative projects and cooking, music, creative projects, and cooking, her heart, I spy on her. She's up in the den working on her projects, and I go in there and I just open the door and I spy on her, and sometimes I just am moved to tears because I see nobody's making her do this. It's her heart. Here's what I found out. She just turned 13 in June. For about 8 months, she has been planning to launch a YouTube channel when she turned 13, because you can't have one before then, right? Unless you lie about it, and she wasn't going to do that. So for 8 months, she has been building these videos and editing them and overlaying music for lessons for kids, to like how to cook a meal for your parents, or how to have a spa day for your friends or your parents and put the cucumbers on your eyes, or how to make snacks for the, and I see this creation and I'm thinking, I'm so glad that she's doing that, and I'm not like making her play golf, because I was a golfer, right? or something that's not in their heart. See, God designed you for something, and it's in your heart. First of all, I want you to listen to your heart. What is it drawn towards? What's awakening in it in this season? What's your heart saying about where you want your marriage to be? What's the promised land for your marriage? Or if you're dating, what's your heart saying about the kind of person and the kind of relationship you want to have? And if you're married, you should not be dating. Those don't go together, okay? Or your business, what's this next season? But look in your heart. So here's the problem. Here's the problem. There's another building out there in Chicago or in the U.S. somewhere. And we try to go in it like this one, and we try to hear the music, and we try to sit down and meet people, and guess what? We can't find that building. And the reason we can't find that building is because it exists, but it doesn't exist in something like this we can walk in, because it's stuck inside the heart of a different little toddler who, when she went and started to put her blocks, she found the blocks in her house, different girl, but she found the blocks and she stacked them up, and she got all excited, and the same kind of talent that God had put in her came alive, and she was just ready to go. She was excited, and she put another one up there, and then an alcoholic father comes into the room, says, "What's she doing away?" Kicks him out of the way, says, "Get her out of here." And that gift was buried. It got squelched. And some of you, in some significant area of life, it's time to dig it up. And God doesn't want that talent buried in the ground. He wants that dream, that next phase. Some of you have thought, I don't know how to have a good marriage, or how to be a parent, or how to build a career, or whatever. That's okay. God does. What He asks you is to get in touch with it and then step out of the boat, and He will make sure that your steps happen. So look at your heart, number one. Number two, when we start to look at this heart, then we got to do something else. The Bible says that our heart has motives, and we must look at our motives. Now, why is this important? It is everything, because what happens is sometimes we will be motivated to do something. Motive, motion. See the words? Move, get movement. Our motives cause us to propel into action. But what the Bible says in another place, in James, what's the exact verse? 4:3. It says that sometimes we're asking God for these things, and I want the next step, or whatever it is. And it says we don't give an answer because our motives are, and you know the literal Greek word there, they're sick. Our motives are sick. It's not that they're bad, or, the word there actually means that there's a sickness, a dysfunction to our motives while we're wanting that. And I want you to ask, okay, why do I want this next step? Because it can be a good thing, but it can be for sick reasons. I was speaking to a group one night, and after the talk, this kid walks up to me and he says, "Yeah, I really enjoyed that talk. I want to do what you do one day, and I'm studying psychology, and actually I want to go to medical school, become a psychiatrist, and so that's where I'm headed." And I said, "That's great. How'd you decide on that?" And he goes, "Well, I come from a long line of physicians," and he gets this really, and my grandfather, in fact, and he names this big medical center, and my father, and this, and he's starting to talk about all of this like statusy kinds of things that this family tree had of all of this. I mean, it was just like one gold medal after another, just narcissism. It was just gross. And I'm sitting there thinking of this guy as a psychiatrist. I'm thinking, I hope I find out where he practices, because I don't want to send anybody I love to him, And I said, okay, well, cool. Just talking to people online. Then this kid, which was not cool, but then this kid walks up to me and says, "I really enjoyed that." He said, "I want to do what you do when I get out of school. And I go, here we go again. Who was your father? I said, why? He said, well, when I started going to church seriously and got more involved, he said, I started to get involved in youth ministry, and I started to work with kids and then older kids and then high school kids, and now I still work in that. He said, I just found out I love just working with people and doing life and figuring out issues. And he said, I just love it. He said, it's so much fun. He said, but the problem was, I made a decision, I want to go into the ministry. He said, but the problem was, then about the 10th grade or so, and I started taking sciences, biology and all this stuff. He said, I just love science. He said, I was in this quandary. I love science and I love working with people. And what am I going to do? And he said, then I figured out I could go into medicine and I would get to be able to be in the sciences and be working with people, especially if I went into psychiatry. He goes, it's the perfect calling. I'm so excited. And I'm sitting over here going, this is so beautiful. I'll pay for your school. And that's how God is. So why do you want to make the next pile of money? Might be a good reason. Might be a not so good reason. Why do you want that relationship, or why do you want that promotion or that next step or that career? We've got to look at the motive, not so you'll be spanked if you have a wrong motive, but so you will find your joy, find what you really, really, really like, and what's going to turn you on. I was talking to a home builder one day, and he said, I'm getting out of the building business. Very successful guy. I said, why? He said, well, it just doesn't have any meaning. He said, I buy land, I develop it, I entitle it, I get it cut up into lots and get the architects in and build the houses and sell them. And he said, I make a ton of money, and then I do it again, I make a ton of money, and I do it again, I make a ton of money, and I do it again. He said, it's just empty. It doesn't have any meaning. He said, I think I want to go into the ministry where I'll have meaning. I knew there was something not quite right with that. For one, I wouldn't want to go to his church if he were the preacher. I could tell you why, but the point is this. A few days later, a second home builder comes in, and we're working on some issues, and he says this. He goes, all this junk having to deal with, he said, but you know what? He said, I don't know what I'd do if it weren't for my work. That's like the best part of my life. I said, what about your work? And he said, building homes. I said, but what about it? He said, I get so much meaning from it. I said, oh, really? Let me give you this guy's number. You should call him. I said, what do you mean you get meaning? He said, well, I go up in the helicopter. The first thing I always do is look at a parcel of land that we're going to develop. Big company, very successful guy. And I look at this land. He said, I'm up there, and I look at the land, and I can see in my mind's eye, I can see the development, I can see the green belts, and I can see the kids playing in the grass and riding their tricycles, and I can see the playgrounds, and I can see the birthday parties happening, at the clubhouses. And then the architects will come in and they'll design it, and I'll look at the drawings, and I'll go, no, you can't put the stairway there. And they'll say, why? And I'll say, because when she comes down in her prom dress, you want there to be a big space for everybody to look up. See how beautiful she is. And you got to make the den attached to the kitchen so everybody can be together. And I'm going, I want to live in one of your houses. See, his heart was about, it wasn't, and this guy had made hundreds of millions of dollars. But that's just a result. It was him pursuing his passion and his heart, and it was truly who he was. So it's going to start here, and you got to find out if it's really you. And we have to look at the motives. Okay, so now having said that, now it's going to get hard. I'm a shrink, and I bring pain. Okay, there's I hate it when somebody says, "Oh, so you're a motivational speaker." No, don't call me a motivational speaker. I bring pain. Okay, that's what I do. All right, so now we're going to get into the third thing, and that is to choose. Now, what would a motivational speaker say? Choose life, or choose success, right? Choose winning. I want you to have life, success, and winning. And here's how you're going to do it. You're going to choose pain. Welcome to church. You're going to choose pain. Now, why do I say that? Because this is the deal. This is the deal. Ready for the deal? God says, I have a promised land for you, a land of flowing milk and honey. It's going to be a great relationship, or a great marriage, or a great business, or a great calling. And it's secured for you. And then he says, Joshua, but you got to go out and possess that land. And to possess that land, there's going to be some pain involved. And here's the deal. Here's the choice God gives us. There's no option that says no pain. But we do get, not in every area, because bad things happen, obviously, in life, but in this way, in choosing this path, we do get to choose the kind of pain in a large way that we're going to have. We get to choose the pain that we're going to have. I was listening to an interview of an Olympic swimmer, a woman who had won a lot of gold medals. I forgot her name. But they were interviewing her about this career, and she says, she's talking about it, and the interviewer goes, gosh, you just must love swimming. She says, I just love swimming. It's in my heart. I love it. I've always done it. And she goes, the interviewer says, so you just must love, like, even the workouts and all that. And she goes, well, she said, there's something I don't love. And the interviewer says, what? She said, well, there's two things I don't love. I hate mornings, and I hate cold water. And she says, well, what do you do? And she said, well, and however many years, more than a decade, every morning, 5 or 6 days a week, 5 a.m. in a cold pool. She says, I hate it. I still hate it. Every time the alarm goes off, I hate it. And I hate to get in that cold water. But I love swimming and competing and winning. You can choose your pain. You can choose your pain. You can't choose not to have pain. Here's what one of my heroes, and I can't remember which one of them said it. I think it was R.D. Lang. I think what he said was this. There's no such thing as no pain. Pain is unavoidable. But the only pain that is avoidable, and perhaps the one that causes the most pain, is the pain that comes from trying to avoid pain. You get that? The pain that comes from trying to avoid pain. Because life has pain. We get to choose a lot of times what kind we're going to have. So look at this. This building, that architect went through a lot of pain to get there, from 2 years old to the day she got the call to design this building. She had to sit down and study sometimes in school when everybody else was out partying. That's painful. She had to stay up at night. She had to maybe work a couple of jobs. She had to do a bunch of stuff. And there was pain involved in getting there, okay? But she chose that pain for the promised land. In a marriage, I don't know one good marriage, unless they're smoking something or in denial, that will tell you this relationship, we had to have some painful moments. We had to work through some things. We had to go through some things. But they chose that pain to get that counselor or to work on it or whatever it was so they could have God's will for them. They chose that pain voluntarily. They went into it. They chose it. And in other areas of life, this choosing a certain kind of pain, which I'm going to talk a little bit about more in a second, the kinds. But we got to arm ourselves with that. The Bible says in 1 Peter 4 to arm yourselves with this purpose, and the purpose is to suffer. It says because if you've suffered, it said like Jesus did, if you've suffered, then it says you're done, you're finished with missing the mark. See, when we do the training, when we do the hard work in marriage or business or whatever it is, and we choose that and don't choose the easy path, we do the work, that's how God's will comes into being. So this architect here, she chose the pain. She chose the pain. You could not choose that pain, and what you end up with is a different kind of pain. And usually that's the pain of regret. Which, looking back, it's when we look back and we realize I didn't take the step I needed for the marriage or for the company or for my career, or taking the risk to go learn how to play that instrument or embarrass myself, singing in front of people or whatever that pain is. And then we get to here at the end of some period of time, and we have the pain of regret. There's loss. So we're going to have one of the two. Today, you are looking at a window in some area of your life where God is stirring something and saying, okay, this next step is going to be a little painful, okay, but I'm going to choose that pain instead of choosing to avoid it because I don't want to end up with the regret that's on the other end of that. And let me read you from I told you this was going to get gross, right? You still with me? Okay. Are you in pain yet? Turn to the person that you came with and say, baby, put me in some pain. I need some pain in my life. All right. I'm going to read this to you. Can you believe these glasses? Who wears something like this? What happened was I lost my glasses and went down to this place on the beach with my wife, and here we go. Hebrews chapter 12. We're going to talk about the pain. Therefore, since we're surrounded, it says, by a great cloud of witnesses. Now, what that's referring to is in chapter 11, he talks about all of the great people of faith that stepped out towards the promised land and what they had to go through and how God was faithful. And he says, we're surrounded by them. And then he says this. Here's what when he talks about the pain. Let us throw off everything that hinders. Let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles us. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Oh my gosh. The race marked out for us. See, I told you God has a design. There's no story in the Bible where he just sort of launches humans somewhere and goes, I don't care where you end up. He has a design. But then he gives us the race to go do. So what does he say? Well, the next pain is going to be the pain of loss. Number one, the things that hinder us. I do not know one person that ever found the will of God that did not have to lose some things to do that. The Olympian had to lose a lot of sleeping in. The person that gets through that difficulty in the marriage has got to lose some time that they don't want to leave work or leave something they like and go to that counseling appointment or go to that group or whatever it is. There are great things in your life right now that to have God's will, the best for you, the great things have got to go away and you got to lose them and you got to get to the best. Let me give you an example of this. I've got a friend who bought a company, about $25 million or so in sales. And after about 5 years, he had taken it to $500 million. And on the way to $1 billion, I asked him, I said, so how did you do this? And he said, really, you want to know? It's very simple. He said, when I bought the company, he said, I figured out that and he used this word, the life of the company, the essence of what it was good at, what its calling was, he said the life of its future was in about 20% of its activities. He said, so I called the management team together one June, and he said, next January, I want all of this gone. From here on, we're taking all of our people, all of our resources. We're going to focus on this 20% because that's where the life is. And he pruned it. Got a lot of pushback, but he pruned it. I said, oh, so this stuff was losing money? See, here's the greatness he had. He said, no. It was all profitable. But it wasn't where the life was. It wasn't where the calling was. See, that's losing something. And we have to do this. Sometimes it's good stuff. You know, I grew up playing competitive golf, and I love competitive golf. I had to quit because of an injury. 5 years later, I found a surgeon, and they had a new thing that could fix it. And so I got to play again starting in my 20s, started playing competitively, you know, as an adult. And loved it until we had kids. And when Olivia and Lucy were little and started to be aware, kind of, you know, who's this other guy that lives here? And they need a dad around. I wanted to be a really good dad, and I want to really win a lot of golf tournaments. And what I figured out at that season, I could not do both. It just took too much work. And now I am not saying, you guys out there, I'm not getting you in trouble, okay? You don't have to quit being golfers. But where I live in LA and my travel schedule and all of that, I just did not have the blocks of time. Because in LA, you just can't run down the street and play golf. It's like an 8-hour trip to go a mile and a half, right? But it just became, it became basically just too much time. And so I gave it up for a season. Now, I'm not saying that to get any kind of, you know, sound cool or something. I'm just saying that it's just true of all of us that if we're going to do something, we got to find out what the best is and sometimes give up even some good things. So there's that loss. That's the first one. What else did it say? It said the loss of good things we got to give up. Things that we love. Okay? But it also said the sin that so easily entangles us. Okay, I'm a psychologist, and here I am talking about sin. In my field, that's not a big word. They don't really like that. They like to use other words because they don't want you being religious about this. But you know what the word sin actually means in the Bible? The Greek word, it means to miss the mark. That's what it means. Like there's a bullseye of the way to live and to be healthy and happy and succeed and all of that. And we're supposed to hit this bullseye. But if we miss it, we're off. That's what sin is. We miss the mark. But in psychology, they'll say, well, that's not a sin. It's just a destructive behavior. Okay, we'll call it that. So what are the destructive behaviors? See, these things entangle us. And the Bible says to throw them off. Now, sin is not something that's really, it's not like you show up in life and you go, okay, there's the line of having, you know, a bent towards not hitting the mark, and there's the line towards, you know, being a perfect person. I think I'll get in this line. See, the Bible says we're all born in this line, and obviously we know this from studying human nature. We're all born in this line where we have stuff that entangles us. And there's sometimes, many times, in some way, all times, there's something of missing God's mark of how we live that's keeping us from the promised land. This can happen in business. You know, it's interesting. When Jesus talked about sin, he talked about sin a lot, but he talked about it in terms of its sickness and its defiling us. But here's what's interesting. The only time he really starts to go on a rant and gets mad about sin, guess who he's mad at? It's not the sinners, it's the ones that think they aren't. It's the religious people. And here's what he said, which is so fascinating because I see it in boardrooms, I see it in executive teams, I see it in families, that it is not just the little sins, you know, that some people think about. It's the big stuff. And you know what for Jesus was the big stuff? It was the relational stuff. He said to the Pharisees, he said, you do all these rules. And all. He said, but you neglect the weightier measures of the law. You neglect where you're missing the mark of God's law. And he said 3 areas. You neglect the weightier measures like justice and mercy and faithfulness. I can tell you from sitting in all sorts of businesses and working